I'm 79 years old, and I want to tell you about all the doors that closed in my face.
My name is Arthur James Calloway. For most of my life, I believed I was unlucky. That's the honest truth of it. I carried that belief the way some men carry a wallet, always there, always with me, something I reached for without even thinking. I tried to open a business at 32. It failed within 18 months. I applied for a position I had worked toward for 11 years, a promotion I had earned, I was certain of it, and they gave it to a younger man who had been there 4 years. I wrote a book in my 50s, spent 3 years on it, sent it to publishers until I ran out of names to send it to. Every letter came back the same, politely, quietly, firmly. No. Door after door after door. And each one that closed took something from me, a little confidence here, a little hope there. By the time I was in my early 60s, I had stopped trying very much at all. I told myself it was wisdom. I told myself I was being realistic. But the truth I wasn't ready to look at yet, was that I had simply become afraid. I retired at 66. My wife Margaret threw me a small party. My children came. There was cake. People said kind things. And I sat in the middle of all that warmth, and I felt underneath it a cold and quiet terror. Because retiring meant it was over. The trying was over. The doors were all behind me now, and none of them had opened. And I was supposed to make peace with that, and tend my garden and watch the evening news and wait. I don't say that unkindly. There is nothing wrong with a quiet life. But for me, at that time, the quiet felt less like peace and more like a verdict, like the world had finally finished deciding what I was worth and had come up with a number I didn't agree with. I spent 3 years like that, 66, 67, 68, going through the motions of contentment. Margaret knew. She always knew. She would look at me sometimes across the dinner table with those steady brown eyes of hers, and I could see her deciding whether to say something. She usually didn't. She was wiser than me in that way. She understood that some things a person has to arrive at themselves. The turning point came in the autumn of my 69th year. My youngest son, Daniel, asked me to help me restore an old wooden boat he had found at an estate sale. Neither of us knew much about boats. That was, I think, partly why he asked me, not because I had expertise, but because he wanted company in not knowing. We worked on that boat every Saturday for almost 8 months. We made mistakes constantly. We used the wrong wood filler twice. I misread a measurement so badly that we had to undo nearly a full day's work. There were Saturdays where we stood back and looked at what we'd done and both quietly agreed it looked worse than when we started. But we kept going, not because we were certain it would work, just because the next Saturday kept coming, and the boat was there, and so were we. The morning we finally put her in the water, a gray, cold morning in early spring, the lake still and flat as a mirror, I stood on the dock and watched her float. She floated. This imperfect, patched together, argued over, mistake-ridden boat simply floated. And Daniel looked at me and he was grinning like he was 8 years old again, and I laughed. Not politely, not the managed laugh of a man performing enjoyment. I laughed from somewhere I had forgotten was still there, and something moved in me, something that had been very still for a very long time. I went home that afternoon and I sat in my study and I thought about all the closed doors. I thought about the business, the promotion, the book. I thought about 66 and the cake and the cold terror underneath the warmth.
Truly the first time, I found myself asking a different question. Not why didn't it work, but what was I being redirected toward? That was new. That question had never occurred to me before. I had always experienced a closed door as a judgment, a verdict, proof of something I lacked. But sitting there that afternoon, smelling of lake water and wood varnish, I found myself wondering, what if some of those doors closed not because I was insufficient, but because what was on the other side of them was never actually mine? What if the book didn't find a publisher because it wasn't the right book yet, because I hadn't lived enough of the story I was trying to tell? What if the promotion went to someone else because staying in that office for another decade would have cost me something I couldn't afford to lose? I'm not saying everything happens for a reason. I'm too old and too honest to sell you something that simple. But I found that afternoon that there was another way to read a life, and I had never tried it before. I rewrote the book at 71. Not edited, rewrote. Started from the beginning with everything I knew at 71 that I hadn't known at 54. It took 2 years. Margaret read every chapter as I finished it, sitting in the chair by the bedroom window, reading glasses on, red pen in hand. A small publisher took it when I was 73. It was not a famous book. It did not change the world. But it existed. It was real. It had my name on the cover, and my life inside it, all of it. The failures and the long silence and the boat and the lake and the gray spring morning and Daniel's grin. I held the first copy in my hands and I thought, this could only have been written by a man who had lived through everything that came before it. Every closed door was in here. Every one of them had contributed something to these pages. They were not failures. They were material. I am 79 now. Margaret is still here, still reading, still watching me across dinner tables with those steady brown eyes. The book sits on a shelf in my study, beside a photograph of the boat on the water that first morning. I write every day. Not always well. Some mornings the words come easily, and some mornings they don't come at all. And I sit with a blank page for an hour, and then go and make another cup of tea. But I sit down. Every morning, I sit down. I found that the sitting down is the thing. Not the talent, not the timing, not the perfect conditions. Just the returning. The quiet, stubborn returning to the thing that matters, even when it offers you nothing back that morning. I found that 79 is not the end of a story. It is, if you let it be, a very interesting place in the middle of one. Here is the quietest truth I know, after 79 years of living it. The doors that don't open are not always locked against you. Sometimes they are simply not your doors. And the life that is yours, the real one, the one that fits, is not always waiting at the first door, or the 5th, or the 20th. Sometimes it is waiting at the end of a long corridor you had to walk in the dark to find. Sometimes it is waiting on the other side of a year you thought would break you. Sometimes it is waiting in a boat shed on a cold Saturday morning with your son, not knowing what you're doing, just willing to begin. I finally understood, at 70, why every door had closed. Not all at once, not in a single revelation, but slowly, the way light comes back after a long winter, so gradually you almost miss it, until one morning you look up, and the room is bright again, and you cannot say exactly when it changed. It changed